Hello everybody and welcome back to another video here on my channel, another reading video. And in today's video I'm going over more so my military style books, not so much just autobiography and or memoirs, but like I said, the more military style books that I absolutely loved, and they will continue to stay on my shelf. I thought in today's video I would change it up just a little bit because it's kind of dreary outside. It looks like it's about to rain, like the skies are just about to open up. However, it's looked like this for 2 days and it is not rained, probably more than maybe a couple drops here and there, more like a sprinkle. And also we have about 75% humidity right now, so it's not too bad, but it's also not necessarily too good. It's around 70-ish degrees, maybe like a 75 or so. And I figured instead of sitting inside, opening up a curtain and using a window, why don't I just go outside? The clouds are out everywhere. I am kind of still squinting because it is still very bright in my opinion, so don't mind that. But I figured we would change it up and I would just sit out front, use our front yard as a little bit of a backdrop. Granted, I am blocking pretty much the other trees, so this looks a lot better in person. I feel like this is a really good angle. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into a couple of the books I have sitting next to me. The first book I have here is a book that I do believe I thrifted at a Desert Industries in Las Vegas when we were stationed out there, and it is actually The Heart and the Fist. I've seen this all over the place out there and I finally picked it up. I think it was only $1, give or take. I think also it was in some book hauls and I might have done a video on it, or it might have been an actual video. If I can remember and find it, it'll be linked up here. Otherwise, this book I really enjoyed. It's about a Navy SEALman and he does go over to the Middle East and some other areas, but you get more of an insight of what he was actually doing over there. A little piece on the summary says, a piercing and inspiring memoir by a Navy SEAL for whom service means a lot more than his time wearing the uniform. And he just really went over there and helped so many people, and I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't definitely one of my favorite ones I've ever read, but it wasn't one that I felt like dragged on forever and ever and I had a hard time reading it. I really enjoyed it. Again, like some of the photos I really enjoyed as well. I thought that, you know, it was like sad because you get the real life type stuff, but then also you get some cool little shots, not necessarily this page, but you get some cool shots eventually of him working and what all he accomplishes and some of his friends. And it's just a really nice little book to understand and to learn about him becoming a Navy SEAL. He was a Navy SEAL, but also he was a humanitarian and he went overseas to help people. And I did like this a lot, especially because it's a little bit more of like the Christian base, or has Christian references to it. But I figured we'd start it off with this one because it's not necessarily my favorite that is sitting on my shelf. This one I don't actually have a dust jacket on, but I do believe I read it probably in 2020, give or take, maybe 2022. I absolutely love this book. It's actually American Sniper by Chris Kyle. I do have the movie. I just recently thrifted that. I do believe on Blu-ray too. So this was really a fun book. I love this book so much. I loved actually reading this and then going on Goodreads. I think Goodreads was the only thing I had at the time back then, but I would go on Goodreads and look at the reviews, and some people who just, they're not in the military lifestyle, and especially back when I read this was before Afghanistan shut down, so I had more of an insight. If you know personally, then you know for Afghanistan, and the things that some people said about Chris Kyle and how he felt. I just found this book very interesting, and I just kind of laughed at some of the things that some people would say, because if you're not in this situation, you just don't know, and not being in a military lifestyle and easily manipulated as a civilian, it's just, it's not funny. In all honesty, it's really not funny, but like it is funny because of how delusional sometimes people are, and it's really sad also. I don't know, I think this was a really great book. At the end, of course, because of what happens when somebody else has to take over writing for Chris Kyle, if you know what happened to him at his end of his life when he was coaching or like helping other vets and other people, it was really sad to get to that standpoint, even though I knew it was coming. But I don't know, this book in general I really loved. I loved the movie. I know they're not one and the same, like it's not the movie based off of just this book, and also there has been more information released with how he wrote this book and how his proceeds didn't go to necessarily his family or his wife, but like they went to specific things that he wanted. And I don't know, it was very interesting to kind of hear about that, even if it's not necessarily fully true or if we're just getting bits and pieces. But there were some things that just made me, I'm gonna say sad, because of just remembering in detail some other like PTSD type things. So I highly recommend American Sniper. Also, they're in thrift stores a lot, so sometimes you can find these. That's where I found mine. I don't remember if it was at a Goodwill or where. That's why also it doesn't have the dust jacket, but I do highly recommend this. And then also watching the movie and just kind of being more open to, if you read this book, not being so close-minded at the same time, and just have a laugh when there's times to have a laugh. And especially now with more information coming out, the reason maybe that he didn't want to spend time with his wife and he always kept it re-enlisting and re-enlisting. When we find out more information, I'm sure more things from this book will click. You can't go wrong with this book. Next, I have a fairly chunky book, but this one is actually during the war, and this is really an interesting book. I love the standpoint. This was before and also during, a little bit after a Pearl Harbor and the bombing, but it's not necessarily at Pearl Harbor or anywhere in the States. It's actually in the Philippines. This is Indestructible. I picked this up at a St. Vincent that I guess was just opening. It was 25 cents. I just picked it up this year when we were home in Kentucky, and I absolutely love this book. I also had this book as my first ever Read It or Unhaul It video, and if you want, you can click back and watch that video because this was just a fun book. I had so much information in here that I feel like I shared with the camera, and I just loved how you're reading about this guy. His name is Pappy, or they call him Pappy, and you're following him for the most part. At the same time, you're following his family once they get separated, and he's like flying and doing all these other things and trying to get back to his family, and his family was stuck on, I do believe it was the Philippines. If not, it was somewhere else, one other island. They eventually got stuck, and then they kind of got captured and went to a concentration camp, and his family just kind of became like insider spies, and I just thought it was so cool just reading about it. And then of course there's like a more of a happy ending, so it's nothing too terrible. The photos, again, I feel like with all the books, just reading about their life or reading about things that happen and then getting to see such cool photos. I love these. I loved looking at all the plane photos. I loved reading along and then trying to match the photos together with what I had already read, and then the photos of the war. I thought it was so interesting. I really like reading about the world wars, but I feel like most of the time when I read about them, it's more of like historical fiction, not real things, but then has like actual historical elements brought into it, and this just being more of like that autobiography, or it was a biography. I can't remember if it was an auto or just a biography, but I really enjoyed this book, and I do recommend this too. I have never seen this, but the cover is what made me pick it up, especially for 25 cents. I ended up really enjoying this book. I have 2 books left, and one of these books I have yet to see this movie, and I have just picked it up on Blu-ray when I thrifted American Sniper and some other movies, so I'm so excited to watch this. And this was probably one of my favorite books in 2020, give or take, because I read this when we were stationed in Wisconsin, and it was before I had our son, because I was still working at FedEx up there on the ramp, and it was snowing when I read this. So it was just a little bit ago, and I've yet to see the movie, like I said. So this is actually Unbroken. I'm sure you've all heard it. You can find these in thrift stores all day long. This is probably number 2 on my shelves. I'm not really ranking all these books necessarily in the order that I displayed them, but this was probably number 2. Ever since I read this, I just thought this was so interesting, and this, in a way, besides the next book I'll talk about later, these 2 books is what really made me want to go out and find more military style books and just read more about the history. And also, I just always loved the military life, and then being in the military life and still trying right now, even though my husband is in active duty, now that we've kind of walked away from it, I'm still trying to have that military life in a way, and this kind of brings back bittersweet memories and or hopes, I guess you could say. I do believe also this is during the war, yes, because this is during 1943, and instead of following kind of like Indestructible, where you're following the war and you're specifically either in, let's just say, like one of the major territories or countries that we were talking about or always is talked about in history class for the war, we actually follow a little bit of that, but then majority of this book, I'd say maybe like 60% of it is actually on the ocean, which I found very intriguing. I loved like the little bittersweet things that happen on the ocean, and I love the whole point that really made me enjoy this book and turn my medium star rating to like a 4 or 5 star. I can't even remember what I rated this, was because our main character actually prayed to God on that boat, and he's like, Lord, if you save me, if you get us home or just off this ocean, I will forever devote my entire life to you. And me being a Christian, I just love that. And of course with the ending, how he became a really older man and he was just taking life day by day as a beautiful opportunity that God gave him, and he was not taking it for granted ever since he got back to the land. And I thought it was so interesting reading about it. It was so fast paced for it being one of those where I feel like most biographies or even sometimes nonfiction just in general, I feel like I read very slowly. This, however, I was reading at a normal pace. I absolutely loved it. Again, there's always photos, but these ones, instead of having like a little photo section, it was just photos throughout the entire book, just randomly placed. And like I said, at the end, it really got me just because of what happened after. Yes, they were actually POWs as well during the war, so you get a little bit of hindsight into that or insight into that, but the epilogue is what really made me love this book. Like, look, he's rock climbing, he's running marathons, he was skateboarding, I do believe. Oh yeah, skateboarding. And he spent his life devoted to God, and he changed his life. He had, if I remember correctly, I think there was a part towards the end where he became like an alcoholic in a way, and he just wasn't the nicest person, but the end of this book was just so good, and I am so excited to see the movie, and I can't talk enough about this book. I think this was done really well. So if you see this in a thrift store and you've never picked it up or read it, go ahead and pick it up and see if you enjoyed it as much as I did. And finally, we have probably my most favorite book with a little bit of sentimental value to it on my shelves. This is actually A Pink Mist by John A. Burkhall. I actually read this book because my husband's family knew this author and he sent my husband a copy, and I love this book. It is set during the Vietnam, and you kind of learn a little bit about the title, but not during, like, while you're reading the book, which I never knew about the title, what it actually meant for a long while. But I loved since this is not necessarily published, I love the font size. I love how bright white the pages are. It was so fast-paced, so insanely fast-paced. This became my favorite one because it was during Vietnam. I thought it was such a cool story because I don't hear too much about Vietnam. I feel like the #1 story that people write about is always the war, fiction or not. It's always World War II, and this being Vietnam, you just get more insight about how they were treated when they first came home, which was so terrible, and then of course some of the things that happened during there. And this also had a different style because they were the ones flying up in the air, flying different things. Since they were flying, you had a little bit more insight of how small and how hard in a way it was to be up in these aircrafts that are technically big, but you don't really have much room, especially as a gunner or sitting here in this position. You know, your knees are up to your chest or you're laying down and you don't move and you're looking out only one way. I thought it was really interesting to be in that mindset or try and put myself in those shoes type way. I don't know, I really enjoyed this. I recommend this all the time to anybody because of, one, it's like a little bit of that sentimental, and two, because it just was something that like I said, I never really read Vietnam before, and I thought it was really interesting, and I think I would like to pick up more Vietnam style books. So if you have any good recommendations, list them down. Actually, if you have any good recommendations for any of these books, I really need to go ahead and pick up more military style books, to be honest. Here are the 5 military style books that I do keep on my shelves. The only 5 that I pretty much read. I don't really get rid of. I don't know if I've ever gotten rid of a military style book, to be honest, but here are the 5 books that I wanted to talk about in this video. I know it's a little bit short. I'm sorry. I just wanted another video for Wednesday, and I thought about doing some genre videos, and I did think about doing like a fantasy sci-fi. So let me know what other genres you'd like to see that I have on my shelves, or books that I just really loved from that genre. But I figured I would do more of a unique genre and or books that you maybe don't necessarily read or you don't even really think about. So that's one reason I did the military style books, and I do have a lot of Christian books I would recommend, or not necessarily a lot because I feel like it would be around 5, but I do have some Christian valued books if that is something that you'd be interested in, or even just some memoirs or autobiographies in general. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this little video, and I hope to see you in another video here on my channel. And as always, God bless. A little airplane. Hi little dirt dauber. Here are the 5 books that I keep on my shelves. This dirt dauber.